And so I just believe that this topic of learning really how to process through grief and loss with God being the key, is very needed and essential in this time. Mental health and mental wellness is something that has kind of become a fad recently, but we don't want it to become a fad. We really want it to become a lifestyle, and not only for us, but even so that we can transfer that information and that revelation and healing that we have received to our children, and they can teach their children, and we can create new foundations for how to take care of ourselves, how to take care of ourselves mentally, how to take care of ourselves emotionally. And so this is such an important topic, and not just grief and loss as it pertains to around death, but any type of grief that you're dealing with, any type of emotional hardship and turmoil that you're dealing with. Those things are important. And so today we have Dr. Taquita Baker and Coach Mercedes Carr, who are experts in this field. They have helped people be healed and delivered in these areas, in this particular area of processing through grief and loss. Dr. Taquita Baker is a licensed counselor, and she has over 20 years of experience in this area. And Coach Mercedes has been working with women for about 8 to 7 years, and really helping them to process through grief and loss, especially as it pertains to relationships, domestic violence, challenging situations that they have dealt with children. And the list can go, the list can go on. And so, and even myself personally, I have been blessed to be able to be connected with them. Dr. Taquita Baker has helped me tremendously in processing through my own areas of grief and loss. I've lost aunts, I've lost, cousins, and even friends more recently, and processing through grief and loss in a healthy way has definitely assisted me in not going into places of depression, and not going into places of allowing emotional heaviness, and even the many questions that arise when you're dealing with grief and loss to those things have not overtaken me because of the connection that I have had with them, and just the years of experience and the revelation that God has given them in this area. So much revelation that Apostle Taquita, Dr. Taquita Baker, has written a book on this topic called Processing Through Grief and Loss, which is pages of keys and information, insight on how to really process through grief and loss in a godly manner, where you can truly be healed, you can find peace again, you can live again. Because many times we find that when people deal with grief and loss, they succumb a lot of the time to shock and trauma, and their life pretty much gets stuck at that point, and they don't feel like they can live again. So these tools will really help people to find peace and joy and live again. So if you know somebody who is dealing with this, go ahead and share this with them right now. Share this with them. Anybody who you know, the people that you've seen on your timeline that have said things like, I hate God, and why did God do this to me? Share this with them right now. Those who you know have lost children or lost parents recently, share, or even that you know of who have dealt with this, who has been dealing with these things over a span of time, even share this with them. It is not too late to be healed. It is not too late to be healed. And so I want to go ahead and just invite Apostle Baker and Coach Mercedes to just share some information with us. And I just want to start by asking them, tell us your personal journey, your personal testimony when it comes to grief and loss. And you don't have to share with us everything, but just give us a little piece, a little glimpse into your journey and testimony with grief and loss.
Awesome. So my name is Taquita Baker, and Where do I start? I have had several experiences with grief and loss. Grief and loss is definitely not easy. It is very challenging. It would probably be, one of the most difficult experiences of your life, especially depending on who you have lost. Myself personally, I have lost two childhood friends who were very close to me. And I've lost my grandmother. I'm the oldest grandchild, and so I was very close to my grandmother. And each one of those deaths, I had to learn uh, about myself and learn about God. And I got to learn God in a unique and different way from what I had been told about grief and what I had been told about, how I could approach God, how I could embrace God. And then just even helping people over the years with grief. I've had to learn how to dismantle some of the religious mindsets I had about grief and some religious mindsets that I had about God, especially thinking I couldn't go to God, I couldn't ask God questions, and just things of that nature. I couldn't question, things that were said and so, or done. And so, myself, I had one experience where one of my friends had cancer. And she was doing really well for a couple of years, and we were praying together for every a couple of days a week. We would pray and contend for her healing. And then after about a couple of years, she began to get sick, and she was actually at a conference, a ministry conference, and she called me and she was like, "I'm not feeling well." And I was like, "Go ask the people to pray for you." And she's like, "I don't want to disturb the conference." I was like, "You wouldn't be disturbing the conference. Like, you would be really providing an opportunity for, God to work a miracle. Like, you're right in the middle of the saints. Go ask to be prayed for." But she wouldn't do it. So I prayed for her on the telephone. And then when she came home, she ended up going to the hospital and getting worse. And as she went to the hospital, she went into a place where she was unable to make decisions for herself. And so that resulted in her family making decisions, and just, so I was no longer a part of the process anymore of being able to pray with her, being able to encourage her, being able to see her. Those things weren't allowed anymore. And it put me in, it shook me. Because I was very worried about her. And then I was trying to process how to pray for her, and just things like that. So, I really had to navigate that time with God, but in a matter of a month or so, I went from talking to her every other day and, basically every day, to not talking to her at all, till then getting a call saying she had passed away. And so I was trying to process that in my mind. And I really, I couldn't fathom it. I was, or what have you. And then there was, there wasn't a viewing either. So I couldn't see her, or what have you. So I'm trying to process from the last time I saw her to not seeing her at all. And I end up being asked to minister and dance at her funeral, which was such an honor, or what have you. But if you know ministry and ministers, we go into work mode then. And so I went into work mode, and I went into comforting and supporting everyone else, and not really being even mindful of my grief. And so that's kind of how I navigated through the funeral time. And it wasn't till a few weeks later till I realized that I hadn't took the time to grieve. And when I did start to grieve, I went into a depression, because I was so depressed that she had passed away. I had contended for her healing all the way up to the time that I got the call that she had passed away. and I wasn't understanding how God was not answering my prayers. Generally, if I pray for someone else, they get well. Why she couldn't get well, and so it really took me into a depression and just a shock, or what have you. And then not having closure. I didn't have closure. I wasn't able to say goodbye. I wasn't able to talk to her, to encourage her or anything. So it rocked my world, literally. And I would wake up in the middle of the night screaming and hollering. I was that grieved. And I would be so depressed. I would wake up, I would be depressed, and I would just throw myself into ministry. I would throw myself into my work and on and on and on. And but at night, I would just be so sad, so depressed, so grieved. I would wake up crying. I would wake up yelling, hollering. And I would share that information with my spiritual sister and my armor bearer. I would say, I'm having these crying spells at night. Sometimes I would call my armor bearer or my sister at night, and I would just be screaming. And so they would just immediately start praying for me. And I would just be so grieved. And after a while, I realized that a year or more had passed, and I was still grieving. And it was coming up on another year, and I said, I can't go through this again. And so I began to process things with my spiritual sister, and I said, I can't go through another year of grieving. I have to figure out how to get past the grief. I have to figure out, what reasons I'm not over my friend's death yet. And I was that's where I made the commitment that I could not go through another year of grieving. And I would be like, I haven't accomplished anything this year and yada yada. And she like, you wrote 5 books, you did this, you did that. But to me, that wasn't accomplishing anything because I wasn't well. I just was, I'm a producer, I'm an apostle, I'm a minister. So, and I'm going to succeed in every season, but that doesn't mean that I'm well. And somebody need to catch that, because a lot of times we think because we are producing things and we're doing good. And I was even praying and ministering to other people, but I wasn't well. And so, even my spiritual sister said, I need to listen to what you're saying, because, I'm like, yeah, because like you're getting up every other day in the middle of the night praying with me. And so that's not well, or whatever. And so I had to really process that. And that really what changed me is that I decided that I wasn't going to go through another year of healing, of depression, and I was going to pursue God for healing. And so then that's what caused me to enter into the healing process with God. But as I did that, now I know how to teach others how to shift into the healing process with God quicker. Because if I would have known that I could process it with God, or if I would have had a mindset, or if people would have said, or if they would have saw my pain, because like I said, I was doing everything during the day, so nobody knew I was in pain. But in the night, I was by myself, and the spirit of grief and the spirit of death and crying spells would just attack me. So I'll just share that for now. And then I'll let
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. These are the types of conversations that we need to be having, because like you shared, sometimes the pain is hidden. Mm-hmm. And so there can be many people who are right by us who are grieving and going through something, even with some of the recent suicide deaths that we have seen in the media. There are people right by us who are hurting and who are grieving, but sometimes the pain is hidden. And sometimes there's not the space created for people to show their pain, and where they feel safe to be this vulnerable, to share their pain and to share their process without feeling the pressure to be okay. And I just have to repeat this key again that you shared, Dr. Baker, on how you were working and you were succeeding, but you were not well. Mm-hmm. And so many people think that their success and their achievements and the things that people see externally equates to wellness, but it does not. It doesn't. Mm-hmm. Success and working and achieving things and continuing to press and push through pain and grief. And sometimes you got to go through it, and then you get to the other side, you're going to be all right. Mm-hmm. You know, that doesn't work. I don't think it works for anybody. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, and most of the time, all of the time, you have to process through your pain and process through your grief in order to really reach, like Apostle shared, in order to really reach that place of true wellness. And so that was a great key. Make sure you write that down. And if you know somebody who is like this, who is working, and so focused on success and so focused on making sure that their appearance online or their appearance with friends looks well, but you know, or you discern that they may be going through something, share that with them. And share this live with them, because this can really be a life-changing moment for them if you would sow this information into them. And so, Mercedes, go ahead, Apostle.
I just want to share one other key. When I was going through that, at times I would share with people that I was depressed, and they would say, "Oh, you're not depressed. You're okay. You're always laughing and, you know, whatever." But my personality is naturally bubbly, witty, funny, what have you. But I would share with people, and then I would even try to share with people that at night I was grieved. I was crying at night. I was waking up out of my sleep at night, and it actually shut me down from sharing because of the way people responded to me, because they wanted me to deny the truth of where I was. And I'm very honest about the truth of where I am, or what have you. And so that caused me also not to share with anyone outside of my armor bearer and my spiritual sister, because when I would share, people would focus on what I did well or focus on my personality and not really listen to what I was saying. And so even in that, I was crying out to say, "Help me, I'm hurting," or what have you. But people were overlooking it because they saw strong Taquita, confident Taquita, getting it done, getting there, doing miracle signs and wonders, and, writing books and plowing and ministering and on and on and on. And there would be even times where I would go to ministries for healing. And I would be in the audience, and when people recognized that I was going to be in the audience, they wanted me to come up and minister. And I would be saying, "I came here to receive. I came here to receive." And I remember there were a few times where I knew the people who were ministering, and I would say, I'm coming, me and my team are coming, and we're coming to receive. We're coming, what have you. But the minute we got there, they would put us to work in ministry. And so it was like nobody made space for me to heal. So I just wanted to share that.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm gonna let Mercedes share in this area too. But one thing that I just wanted to share is when you were sharing about how other people dealt with you sharing, I believe that that's typically other people's way of dealing with your grief and dealing with the uncomfortable space that you're put in when you have to deal with someone else's grief. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, go ahead, Mercedes. I'm pretty sure you have something to tag in on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that grief is a very uncomfortable topic, and sometimes it hurts to see the people we love hurting. And it's very sad, but I think it can almost be a defense or a coping mechanism for people who are supports, because they don't want to go into a place of sadness or depression or grief. And so instead of asking that person what they need and shouldering them, they kind of just give them what they feel like they might need. And that's not really beneficial. And so, yeah, I think everything that both Apostle and Nina said were just so key and pivotal. But I can share a little bit about my process. One of the most significant deaths that I dealt with, I believe it was 2015, my grandmother passed away. And my grandmother was like my best friend. So we were very close. I grew up with her and my mom. She was always there from birth all the way up. And every summer, when I would come home from college or anything of that nature, I would stay with my grandmother. And so one particular summer I came home to visit and I stayed with her that summer, and we just went to a normal doctor appointment. We would always go to doctor's appointments and things together. And at that doctor's appointment, we were just, there for a regular checkup. And the doctor came in and said that she had either stage 3 or 4 cancer. And so my grandmother has lived through heart attacks. She has had many strokes. She has died on the operating table before and come back to life. So I guess a sense of there was almost a part of me that thought she was invincible. It was just like, grandma, just like, she gets through everything. She's not, she's going to be with us forever. And so I just was like, okay, this is just another thing for her to be. It wasn't really, it was sad, but we were more so challenged because there had been no signs. We never had heard anything. It literally went from her being, having her other little health issues to coming in and being at stage 4 cancer. And so they gave her ultimatum, you can either get radiation, chemo, or you can go ahead and live your life without those things, and you'll probably live for a couple of years. And so, from the diagnosis to the time where things got really bad, my grandmother actually was around for a while. So she had been living with the cancer in her body for a couple of years, and we didn't even know it. And so, similar to Apostle had shared, we got her on the prayer call. We were praying for her every week. We were making sure that she was being covered. I had talked to her and had a personal conversation with her and asked her, what do you want? And she said she wanted God to heal her. And so I was like, okay, I'm in agreement with you. Let's pray about that. Let's fast. Like, that is what we're going to focus on. And so for months and months, we would focus on that. We would pray, fast. And even as I was home during that time, I would hear her in the room. Her room was across from mine. I would hear her crying out to God, asking him to heal her, asking him to take the pain away, asking for forgiveness, repenting, asking him to salvage old relationships. Like, I heard her pray more in those, couple of years than I did my entire life. And she was a praying woman. And so I knew that it was something that she really wanted. And so that was really hard to hear. But, it really just was an area where I was like, okay, we're just going to keep interceding. And then I came back to school. And at one particular time, I got the call that she was being hospitalized. Her cancer had eaten up her whole left lung. And so she was not coming out of the hospital. And so she was in the hospital, and I called her. And she seemed okay. She was laughing. She was joking. She was having a good time. And so I hurried up. Me and, Nina, another spiritual sister I have, we all went down there. We visited her. She was doing okay. And so I was there with her for the weekend, and had to come back to college. Then I told her, I was like, I'm going to be back in about a week, and I'm going to be here with you. So I came back. And when I came back, things had progressed. Her oxygen levels were really low. They had to turn up the oxygen really high. And I was in a place where I was still processing what was going on, because we had been praying for healing. And I really believed that God was going to give her a miracle. So death was not really in my mindset. I didn't really think about it. I was just like, God's going to do it. He's just, moving. He's just looking for an opportunity to move. This is just a chance for him to be God. Like, I'm being so religious in certain areas. Some areas I really have faith. Some areas I was just being religious. And so that was comforting to me. And that evening we were there and we went to sleep. My grandmother was up laughing, talking to people all day. And then at a certain hour, she had looked at the clock and she closed her eyes, and not too much longer longer after that, the, monitor went off and she had passed away while I was in the room. And so I was in complete shock and awe. I could not believe that she had passed away. I was completely overwhelmed. But in that same moment, although I was completely confused and didn't understand, there was a sense of peace that had come over me. And I had prayed to God, even when she was first diagnosed, I said, God, if she ever leaves due to this diagnosis, I'm going to need you to give me the peace that surpasses my understanding, because I can't handle that. We were so close and we were so tied together that it just wasn't something I could imagine. I couldn't imagine living my life without her. And so when it took place, I think I was just in shock and awe. I went home. I was still in shock and awe. Days later, we would have the funeral. And I think that was probably the first time that I really, really cried, was at the funeral. And even then, I was still in shock and awe. I didn't really understand what was going on. I was kind of processing it, but I wasn't. And then when I got home by myself, and the next day, I did not have her phone call because we talked every day before class. I was so confused and I did not really know how to navigate. We talked 3 times a day. She would check on me. She would always, tell me, watch your surroundings, what you eating for dinner. She was always, dialoguing with me every day. So that was very different. And once I began to listen to her old voicemails, one popped up on my phone. That is when it hit me that she was actually gone. And that is when I began to grieve. And my grief process was very different. I did not cry a lot. I did not go through a lot of trauma necessarily where it was outward, but it was just a lot of reflection. And during that time of being with my grandmother, and what I believe God did was he gave me the opportunity to see her evolve into who she needed to be before she went home with him. And so the forgiveness of the kids, she got baptized, like she began to change, so many things in her life. And God allowed me to see that process. And there was such a peace because I'm like, I know where she's at. And so it shifted when she was in that hospital and she was going through all of that pain and all of that, just she was so tired. And she looked at us and she said, we were like, the nurse was like, okay, well, the next step is sending you home on hospice. We're going to allow you to be with your family and friends and just kind of, you will pass there. And my grandmother looked at everybody and she was like, I'm not going home. Like, I'm not going back to that house. And so we were like, what do you mean you're not going back to that house? Like, not paying it any mind. But I think at some point she had shifted to realizing that she would rather be with God than to be with us. And I think that was something that nobody wanted to hear. Nobody wanted to deal with. But as we were there, she was giving us so many cues that she was tired and she was ready to go. And so it was a hard thing to take in. But that peace of God that surpasses all understanding, I can't really explain the miracle and the supernatural process of grieving that I went through, because it was as if I knew she just had transitioned, but it didn't feel like she had left my life. And so God comforted me in that time like never before. I've never experienced the love or the comfort of God like that in any season of my life. And my family and my friends were checking on me the most because I was one of the closest grandkids to her, even closer to her than some of her children. And I would hear people say things like, you doing too much, you're moving too much, you're too busy, like it's gonna hit you, like you're gonna break down at some point. And I'm just like, and I got fearful. I got to a point to where I was like, well, God, is this really peace or is this superficial? Is this me just, hoping in my own way? And I really got into a place to where I was fearful that I was going to break down. And so that took me into a place of anxiety. But outside of that, when I really rested and settled into God, that time never came for me. I never broke down. I never felt God's hand lift off of that process. And I think he knew how much it would have broken me. And I think that he just knew what I was graced to carry. And I wasn't graced to carry that. And so, it was just one of those supernatural things where he just began to heal me over time. And I was able to get a sense of peace when she left. And, of course, you grieve that person, you miss them, you love them. But I can say that process for me was supernatural. And even to this day, when I think about my grandmother, I have waves of just, remembering her, just, feeling really lost in the sense of like, it just doesn't seem like she's not here, because there were so many things that she had wanted to be here for that she's not going to be able to see. But God has maintained and been there with me through every step of the grieving process. And so I would say, for me, I did keep very busy. I did stay steady. I didn't slow down with anything. But when I finally did slow down and process and meditate on what really was going on, I can just say that God was a keeper. He kept me in that time, and he gave me revelation, very clear dreams of my grandmother transitioning over. Clear dreams from my family members of her saying, I'm so glad that I'm there and not here. There was just so many different things that God had released. And I'm just thankful for his peace, and I'm thankful for him walking with us through the process. And I pray that if you are grieving, that you have invited God into the process, because he really does care and he wants to be with you in that process if you give him the opportunity to be. So that's kind of what my situation and circumstance was like in that situation.
You really shared some good keys there, Mercedes. And as I was listening to your personal testimony and experience with your grandmother, I just was thinking about how everyone's experience in processing through grief and loss is going to be different. And so when you consider grief and loss, your experience and the way that you deal with it cannot be compared to and cannot be modeled after another person's experience. And so even as Apostle has written this book, Processing Through Grief and Loss, this is not a step by step about blueprint of what you have to do and how it's going to be. It's about how you can connect with God and what God is saying and how God is going to help you process through your relationship with God, your engagement with him, your receiving of his healing, how those things will help you receive what you uniquely need through your process. Because even as we've been on this Facebook Live, Apostle Baker's experience that she shared and Coach Mercedes' experience that she shared were two different experiences, and they can't be compared. And there wasn't one that was better than another one. It was their experience, and they received what they needed to receive from God through that. And so one of the keys that I received through listening to Mercedes was, don't try to model your grieving experience after someone else's experience. So even as we would consider that, what are some of the common misconceptions about grief and loss? I would like to ask you guys, as we will consider about how everybody's process is going to be different. And even as Apostle Baker was sharing, there are so many things that people say around grief. And a lot of it is religious, and a lot of it doesn't really help a person to overcome. And a lot of it leaves the door open for grief to stay. Well, I know I'll never get over it, but I'm doing good today. Like, there are declarations and things that we speak over ourselves and that others release over us concerning grief and loss that are not really helpful to our healing process. So if you guys could speak to that, what are some of the common misconceptions about grief and loss, especially those that are unhealthy and not really helpful to our process?
I can share a couple. Some of the things that I see or hear very often, and one of the things that it kind of grinds my gears and it makes me very uncomfortable when people say that time heals everything and things will return to normal. So, all you need is a little time. If you just wait, things are going to get better. Things are going to get back to normal, or even having the mindset that after a certain amount of time, you should just be over it. Your husband's been dead for 5 years. You ain't over it yet. You must be stuck, or you must be dealing with this, that, or the other. But the idea that time is going to heal a person missing from your life is that's just not how it works, especially if God has not been invited into the healing process. So really being careful about speaking those general comments or making someone feel like because they have not come to a place of being completely healed from that experience, in a certain amount of time that they're doing something wrong. I think that that's definitely a big misconception. And even understanding that who wrote the timeline? You know, you're not God. You're not able to say when a person is going to be healed from a certain situation. Now, we know people do slip into unhealthy grieving, and it does get to a point to where it's like, okay, some things need to change. But for you to look into a situation, that person will never be in that other person's life before. So normalcy might not look like it ever did for them. And so that idea that things will be normal again is definitely a big misconception, or that it'll return back. The idea that Christians have God, so their grieving is easier, that is a misconception. Just because we have God, just because we have faith, it does not make grieving necessarily easier. We just have tools and blueprints and the support of God to help guide us through that. And so another thing that I think that is really important to remember is that just because you have God in the grieving process, it doesn't mean that you're not going to hurt. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have pain or grieve. You just, like I said, you have that support of, you know, of your Heavenly Father as you're going through that process. Let's see. People sometimes say things like, you know, they're in a better place, or, you know, well, especially when you're dealing with the grief of a child. A lot of the people who have had miscarriages or who have lost children before they have entered the world, people will say things like, well, they've never entered the world. At least they weren't running around. At least they weren't, 5, 6, 7 years old. It's a good thing that they were still in the uterus. At least they didn't, you didn't know them yet. So you can have more kids. You can have other children. You still have time. That is not comforting to someone who has lost a child. If you are carrying a child and, you could have a baby and you could have, someone who is a 10-year-old, as a mother, you're going to love that baby in your belly as much as you love your 10-year-old that's running around. You have dreams, visions, things that died with that child. And so there's things that we perceive should be less of grief or cause less pain. That is not the case. And so I think just in general, the mindset that grieving has a time, grieving has a certain look, grieving has a certain face. You should act this way, look that way, carry yourself that way, present that way. If you cry too much, you're going to be consumed by your grieving. Just all of these different things that make us feel like there is a blueprint, but like you had said earlier, Nina, there is not really a blueprint for grieving. Your blueprint is whatever you and God decide is best for you. So those are some of the things that really I have seen that have been negative, or making people feel like they have to have it all together. And just put your best face on. If you just push through, it'll get better. Keep going to work. Keep doing this. Keep doing that. Get a hobby. It'll all go away if you just throw yourself at something. And that's just not the case. And it can be very unhealthy. And like Apostle shared earlier, you could be drowning in depression in plain sight, and no one would know, because they are forcing you to perform when really it's a time to heal. So those are some things that I've seen.
Man, those were so good, Mercedes. And if you are on this live right now, if you have heard things, please put them in the comments right now. The things that you have heard in your church or through your faith walk or in your family or your surroundings, what are some of the common misconceptions that you have heard or that you have even personally experienced? Put those in the comments. We would love to hear what those are, so that we can further debunk those areas and really provide some actual biblical, godly insight about those areas. Because like Mercedes shared, none of those things are really true. They may feel good in the moment, but really, eventually, because they have no truth or foundation, those things wear off, especially, the ones about how they're in a better place. Well, that's going to wear off eventually, because most people would think, they were in a pretty good place with me, or they were in a pretty good place in their life, if they were taken early, or even a newborn baby, like Mercedes was sharing, like most people on earth would think, this is a pretty good place for them to be. So yeah, share those with us. I'm just going to share a little bit. I have Charity who said, let's see what she said. She said, I've heard he wouldn't want you to be sad, so don't be sad. Yeah, that's a big one. They wouldn't want you to be sad. Of course, of course you're going to be sad. Sadness and, normal emotions are healthy. So yeah, share those with us. We'll come back and look at them and, further provide some revelation and insight as we will continue doing these Facebook Lives. And one of the key things that Mercedes shared, even as she was talking, was grieving does not have a face. Grieving does not have a face. Write that one down too, along with the key that Apostle gave us earlier about working and succeeding does not mean that you are well. Add this key: grieving does not have a face. It does not have a specific personality, blueprint, or way, or set fixed way that it has to be. And so, let's see. Yeah, we'll come back to those. Thank you so much for sharing those in the comments. Though learning about what you guys hear is going to be very helpful to us. So Apostle, if you would come in and share with us some of the common misconceptions that you have heard.
That crying is weakness. So we equate how much we cry or the fact that we cry to weakness, that we have to be strong and push through. Those are definitely some common misconceptions that really cause you to stuff your emotions. That women grieve more than men. Men don't grieve, or what have you. And even if a man isn't like emotionally expressing his grief, that doesn't mean that men do not grieve. And so we really need to be there and support men just as much as we support women, or what have you. Sometimes in the grief process, men get kind of tossed to the side, or they get duties as opposed to being really supported, because they don't naturally, they've been taught not to emote, basically. But men grieve just as much as women do. And so we need to be mindful of that. The other misconception would be that family and friends is always the best support. And if you were here earlier when I was sharing my story, or what have you, specific people were a good support, but sometimes you might need a counselor. Sometimes you might need a voice that's outside of that situation that isn't so focused on fixing you, that they can help you to navigate through the healing process. And a lot of times we go to our family and for things where we may need an expert, or where we may need someone who's going to allow us to rest in the process of grieving and go through the stages naturally without trying to rush us through them or fix us. And so I would say that is one. And then the other one is we have to be okay with the person dying. We got to accept what God did. We have to regard what God did, and we can't have any challenges about the fact that that person died. And that's a misconception. The word says that there is a time of mourning. So God knows that we're going to have challenges with the decision that was made. And then there's those times where God didn't have nothing to do with the decision. The free will took over, or what have you, or, whatever, the free will of who that person or some other circumstance may have caused the death, and not necessarily God himself, or what have you. And so, and that's a whole nother lie. So we'll think or assume that we can't be angry about the grief, or we can't be angry about the death, or we can't be challenged by the death, or challenged that we want the person to still be living. And a lot of times when we're trying to make ourselves accept something that our emotions have not lined up with yet. It just prolongs the grief process. It makes us angrier, more depressed, and more frustrated. So it's really best to, not yield to misconceptions and just really allow yourself to stay in the moment of the processing, and whatever it is you're thinking and feeling, allow yourself to process that with God. So.
Yes, that was definitely very good. Thank you for sharing that. And I had a few more things that I wanted to ask, but I'm going to hold many of them for next time, just because some of them are going to open up a whole new well. But one last question that I would like to ask you all is to just give us just a few, maybe like one or two from each of you, a few coping mechanisms that are essential must-haves when processing through grief and loss. Some essential must-haves.
I think that when you're going through the grief and loss process, you have to find your vulnerability. You have to, if you've never been vulnerable with God before, if you've never been honest, if you've never felt like you could express your emotions to him before, this is the time and the place to do that. If you don't have vulnerability and you're not willing to express your anger, express your grief, express those areas that you feel like shouldn't have went the way that they have went, it's going to be very hard to go through the grieving process. And so I think that you have to be honest with God about your emotions and your feelings, like Apostle Taquita had shared, and really give him the space to come in and be the comforter. So, he desires to comfort you. He desires to give you wisdom and revelation. So just knowing, we do know, the Bible does tell us, that our ways are not, his ways, and our thoughts are not as high as his thoughts. However, that doesn't mean God does not want you to have a sense of peace. He wants you to receive what it is that you need in order to go through that process. And for many of you, I see God literally lifting you up and carrying you through the process. But some people get stuck behind that wall of anger or behind that wall of resentment, where they're just like, they do not want to admit that they're angry with God, or either they will admit that they're angry with God and they're stuck in that anger phase. And so, you feel like, okay, I've been through this grieving season for so long, like I can't get out of this. I keep cycling through this, but God is saying, we have to get past this angry phase first so that you can at least allow me in enough to talk to you about the anger. It's okay that you are angry, but we need to be able to talk about that. So I think that the biggest step is really inviting God into your grieving process. Even if you're just inviting him in to tell him that you're upset with him, he needs to be there and he needs to hear that so that you can get that off of your chest and you can begin to process through that. So I think expressing your grief and being very clear with God about how you feel is very important. Don't sugarcoat, don't hold things back. If you need to get a journal to write those things out, that is completely fine. But you do want to express your feelings, and then really make sure that you have accountability and you have people who are around you who are able to help you through that process. And so, like we were talking about earlier, that might not be your best friend. That might not be your normal accountability partner. It might not even be family. A lot of times we feel like because family, you're my brother or you're my sister, we both lost our grandmother. So we should be able to relate. We should be able to support one another. But how am I going to help you in your grieving process when you're drowning too? So if we're both grieving and we're both drowning, we're not going to be able to support one another and lift one another up. I can love you. I can pray for you, but you need to, get a counselor. You need to go to a grief coach. You need to figure out what it is that you need in this process. And so I would just say, be honest with God about your feelings and allow him to give you specifics in regards to what you need. Do not jump into any religious practices. Don't jump into, I'll just worship my way through it. Now, worship is a tool. Worship is a weapon, but you're going to have to sit down and you're going to have to be still before the Lord. You can't always be doing something, or else you're not going to be able to really receive what he has for you. So making space to feel, making space to receive, making space to experience. It's going to be painful. Some people don't want to sit with their grief or sit down long enough because they don't want to feel what it feels like to really grieve. They're like, as soon as I sit down and really deal with this, I'm going to be overcome. I'm going to break. I'm not going to be able to recover from this. And that was one of my fears. And so you just have to know that you can trust God. He's not going to allow you to die in your grief. You just have to invite him in that process, and he's going to show you the way. So make a space for healing. Be okay with taking your time, and don't allow anybody to rush you through your grieving process would be my advice.
Awesome. I would say making sure you exchange your grief for the fruit of God when you're before him. Because a lot of times, we, like Mercedes said, we're not really sharing with the Lord. But then when we do share, whether that be with people or what have you, we're not exchanging the love, the comfort. We're not receiving the comfort. And even when I think about my situation, when I was sharing my experience earlier with my friend, I wasn't receiving the comfort of the Holy Spirit. I wasn't receiving the love of God and the healing of God. I was angry and I wanted my friend back, the end period. And so I wasn't able to I was stuck in that place. And so it's important to want the healing and to exchange when you're in those moments of reflection with the Lord or with whoever it is that you're processing with. You have to be vulnerable to navigate through the healing process. And part of that also is accepting truth. It's essential that you accept truth and that you want to hear truth. Because a lot of times when people die, we don't want to hear the truth that it was time for them to go. We don't want to hear the truth that, or whatever it is that surrounding their death. And we have to want to hear truth. And I know for myself, I would ask God, but because I wasn't in a place to really hear truth, I didn't hear until I got into that place where I have to be healed. Like when I got into that place, then I began to have revelation and insight on things that I didn't even recognize or wasn't ready to experience or hear during the time that my friend was sick and also as she would have passed away. And so wanting the truth, because that's one of the things the Holy Spirit comes. He is a comforter, but he guides us into truth. And so in order to grieve in a healthy way, you have to come into a supernatural process. You can't do it in a natural. It's like forgiveness. Forgiveness is supernatural. It can't be done in your natural strength, in your natural emotions. You can say, I forgive you, but if you don't really come into the supernatural process of the grace that forgiveness brings, you will not exchange that supernatural healing for that unforgiveness. You just won't make the change. And so you have to come into the supernatural process of wellness with the Lord and want to process with him in truth, wanting the truth about where you are, wanting the truth about, the situation, and wanting the truth of, I can live without this person. I can go on without this person, because a lot of times we make a lot of vows too that hinder our stages. We say, I'm never going to laugh again. I can't go on. And we speak all of these things and we begin to live out that in our grief process rather than living the truth. Mercedes talked about that God wanted to give us peace. In John 14:27, it says, peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you. Not as the world give it, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. And so there is a peace that God gives us, but you have to come into the supernatural process of wanting to be healed, wanting to live without that person and moving on, or what have you. And then also, understanding that death is a part of life. It's inevitable. We're all going to die. You know, just like we live, we're all going to die at some point. And so in living your life so that you can impact the world, where when you die, you know, it doesn't matter when you die, you know, you have lived the best life possible in your destiny on earth. And so a lot of times we don't live like we're going to die. We live like we're going to live forever. And part of recognizing the truth about grief is understanding that death is part of life. And that, you know, we're not going to live in this natural world forever. There is an eternity that we're going to, and we're all living to die. We're all living for the purposes of leaving this world and going into living eternity with the Lord. So we're not going to live in this earth realm. We're going to shift out of this earth realm, and either somebody going to hell or somebody going to heaven. Okay. And so, that's part of it too. I think we got to start teaching on grief. And that's just my last point. We don't teach on the things that we need to teach to help people embrace and cope. We have to start teaching on death and the truth about death, the truth about grief, and embodying it as part of our journey. Because guess what? It is. There is a time to mourn. And there is a time to die. It's in there. You know, it's just as there is a time to be born, there's a time to live, there's a time to die. There's a time to laugh, there's a time to mourn. So those would be my keys.
Can I share something really quick that came when you were sharing that exchange that needs to take place? The scripture that God showed me was Isaiah 61:3. And it talks about God comforting Zion. And it says to console the mourners of Zion, to give them a crown of beauty for ashes. There's an exchange here. The oil of joy for mourning. There is another exchange, and a garment of praise for a spirit of despair. There are 3 exchanges that took place in that scripture, so that they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. And so when we think about that, you know, there are specific things that God wants to give you in this grief process. And you actually would have to go before him and ask him, God, what is the exchange? What are the things that you want to give me in exchange for death? Are you trying to give me life? Are you trying to give me comfort? Are you trying to give me peace? And really get an understanding, because I think when we have that in the forefront of our minds and we understand what the exchange is, we have a better understanding of what's next. Because sometimes grief can make us feel like, I can't get, like you said, I can't get up tomorrow. What's the point of moving forward? What's the point of living? But when you have that exchange before you and God is saying, this is what you're pursuing. This is what I'm offering you. This is what I have for you. I think that brings you into a place of hope, because hope deferred makes the heart sick. And so when we come into a place of grief and our hope is deferred, we get sicker and sicker and sicker. And so when we choose to make that exchange, God really does show us that there are all of these promises that we have that are available to us when we make that exchange. And then he also says in that scripture, you're going to be planted like an oak of righteousness. And so one of the things that I am learning is that when you go through a process of grief with God and you stay in the process and you receive that exchange, there is a planting and a solidification that happens where your roots are grounded, where you're like, I know what it feels like to grieve. I know what it feels like to be in immense pain, but God is still good. I'm still planted in righteousness. I'm still planted in what he has called me to do and who he has called you to be. And so there is an establishing that happens when you allow grief to take its course. And so I thought that was so good what you shared, Apostle, especially about making sure that we are not living as if we're going to be here forever. And also not living as if our family members, our friends, or the people that we love are going to be here forever. Because one of the things that I see a lot when people are grieving, there is an immense level of just the grief tied to resentment and also tied to just mistakes. So I wish I would have spent more time with them. I wish I would have. I just got into an argument with my mama last week. I was so disrespectful to them and all of these different things where we're not really honoring the people in our lives the way that we should. And the death of them or the loss of them hits us like a ton of bricks because we're not operating healthily in our relationships like we should be. Whereas if we are, Apostle, you spoke from a standpoint of having a healthy relationship with someone and that broke you completely in certain areas. Imagine going into the grief process when you have oughts, when you have areas of unforgiveness, areas where you didn't release that person in certain areas and things like that. So it's just so important to love and to do life well with ourselves, with God, and with the people who are in our lives so that when it does come to that time of grieving, we don't have to deal with those extra layers of things that God never intended us to carry into our grieving process. And those things keep us bound and choke us up sometimes too, because regret sometimes can be heavier than grief or the guilt. And so we just have to be really careful about that. And like I said, just really clinging on to that key of asking God what that exchange is that you need to make, because that really does open up the door to life and really going into a new place, transitioning to a place from death to a place of life and really receiving what God has for you in the grieving process. So I thought that was really important.
Yes, those were really great keys. Started from Apostles' keys into Mercedes' keys that she just gave us. We are not even scratching the surface of this book. We haven't even got into the meat of it yet. Today we're just talking about things that people are going through daily. We haven't even gotten to the revelation and the application of how to really go in depth in processing through the grief and loss. So yes, this book is called Processing Through Grief and Loss, and it is written by Dr. Taquita Baker. And if you want to learn more about the things that we have been talking about today and really receive the applicable tools to be able to really process and heal, go to kingdomshiftingbooks.com today and get your copy of that book. It is going to be something that you can journey with, and not only you, but the people in your life around you. I think we have to get into a place where we're not only receiving what we need, but we are receiving it so that we can then give it and share it with somebody else, and we can share it with our families and our friends and those who are around us. So we are only just scratching the surface. So visit kingdomshiftingbooks.com and get that book. And if you have been blessed on this Facebook Live today, in the comments, just say blessed. Blessed. I have been blessed. Whatever you want to put in there. If you want to put some praying hands in there, if you want to put a heart in there, let us know that this time that we have spent talking about this has been a blessing. I believe that the things that we have shared today are so needed. And like Apostle shared as she was speaking, this is something that we need to teach. We teach on so many other things, but this is a topic that needs to also become a priority as well as those other things. So thank you for everything that you shared. And on February 25th and February 26th, so the 25th and the 26th, which is a Friday and a Saturday, we're going to be having an entire webinar that is dedicated to this topic of processing through grief and loss. And I see your comments coming in. Yes, you're blessed. You have been blessed. You got in on the last part, but you will catch the replay. Absolutely. Catch the replay and send the replay to somebody else who needs this revelation. It is so key in this time. So yes, we are having a webinar that is completely dedicated to the topic of learning how to process through grief and loss. And you can sign up for that. There is a link that is pinned in the comments you can use that link right now to go and sign up. And if you sign up today, there is a discount for you. So if you sign up today and begin to invest in this healing and invest in what God is doing, not only for you, but the people around you, you are really going to receive some life-changing revelation that you can apply to your life, and you can assist those around you in really learning how to process through grief and loss. Even if you are a leader in your church and you know that your ministers and leaders don't know how to help their sheep process through grief and loss, sign your ministers up for this conference too, because then they can help that person on the pew that has lost their family member process through the grief and loss, where they are not staying in a place of having doubts about God, believing that he killed their family members, and he allowed death and different things, different misperceptions like that. Get your ministers and your leaders some training. So go right now and sign up for this webinar. Today we spent about 45 minutes to an hour sharing. During this time, we are dedicating 5 hours over the course of 2 days, 5 hours of continual outpouring in the area of sharing what God has given Apostle Baker and Coach Carr about processing through grief and loss. So sign up for that. And anybody that you know who will be blessed by this, share this with them. And I will tell you right now, we are not a stingy ministry. We are going to pray until we know you have broken through. We are going to pray until we know that God has done a transformative work in your life. So really, I shared that the webinar is 5 hours long, but really it's probably going to be like 6 hours. 6 to 7 hours long, because they are going to pray for you and they are going to walk you through. And you will also have the chance even to share your personal experiences, your testimony. You're going to be able to ask questions. So this is going to be a forum where you can really dialogue with people who are also processing through the things that you are processing through, and experts who have dedicated their prayer time and their study time to really seeking God on how to help people heal and process in this area. We can't go forward with the religious jargon that doesn't really help people and doesn't heal them. We can't go forward with that. We have to have some tools. And as the body of Christ, we have to be a source and an answer and a solution to people where they don't feel like they have to go to they don't have to go to worldly sources. They don't have to use sage to get the spirits out. Oh. They don't have to get the crystals and they don't need to talk to grandma again if she has passed. And so we really need, as those who are in the body of Christ, as those who have been given the power to heal the sick, and to raise the dead and to cast out devils, those who have been given the power to heal and to do miracles and to help people be made whole, we have to start here. And so take the time and sign up for that webinar today and share this webinar by word of mouth, and by sending this into someone's DMs or bringing them to watch this replay so they know that this is not a joke. We are really taking the time to really pray and to press and to sow and invest in pouring into you via what God has poured into us. So, and thank you so much for sharing what you share in the comments. We're going to go back and look at those things and be able to further pour into you as we will come back next Thursday. Are we back Thursday? We will be back. Apostle Baker and Coach Carr will be back on Thursday once again to share on this topic.
We're going to be in Clubhouse on Thursday, and then next Tuesday we'll be back on Facebook.
Okay.
So please join us on. Okay. Yeah. So please join us on Clubhouse on Thursday at 6:30, and we're going to talk more about grief And then we'll be back on Tuesday on Facebook. So, yeah.
Okay, awesome. So if you or Mercedes have any last things to share, and then we're going to close, and we will see you all next week.
I just would like to also just thank everyone for being on the live and say, please share the live. And also, please get the book. I put practical tools in the book. Even when I talked about how you can navigate grief and loss with God, that's in there. I give biblical scriptures on the truths about death, the truths about God as it relates to death. I even talk about demonic grieving in the book, because there is a place where you can go where you literally feel like your soul has went into hell, into a dark and gloomy place. And that's when you know that you are in, you're in a not so good place in your grief process. And so how to identify when you are grieving in a healthy manner and you're navigating through the stages properly, even though you're maybe still continue to hurt, even though you still may be having resentment or anger or depression, versus when a spirit of grief has come upon you. So I talk about that, and I also talk about how to deal with different types of grief. Right now, we're definitely in a time where people are committing suicide. They're committing terrorism, where they're killing family members or shooting up stores, then killing themselves, and then we're having constant grief. So that's something that we're going to be talking about too, as well, where, I'm not even over brother dying, and now sister has died, and now aunt has died. And so how do you navigate through constant serial grief? The trauma of that. And so the book will, like Nina said, help to journey with you. And so I highly recommend it. It has some great tools in there that you can really apply to your life to navigate with God and with the people around you in relations to grief, and help others grieve. If you need counseling, deliverance, or inner healing in the area of grief and loss, I do offer those services via Zoom and face-to-face. So no matter where you are in the world, I can help counsel you in those areas. And I highly recommend, if you need help processing through grief, do not hesitate to go see a counselor. Do not hesitate to go see a counselor. It's okay to need a counselor. The longer you delay with not embracing the grief process, the longer you stay in it. And so if you don't want to stay in it, do what you need to do to get well. Okay. So that means you are allowing yourself to hurt longer because you won't take the steps that you need to get well. So that would be my last remarks. Blessings, everyone.
I just wanted to thank you all for joining. I look forward to meeting with you all again as we continue to navigate this area of grief and loss. I think that God will continue to share revelation and even decree that you just even receive a measure of healing as you received of the revelation tonight. And we are praying for you guys and just decreeing that your process would be peaceful and that